So don't worry about the attendees. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
And,
A very good afternoon to all of you. I take this opportunity to wish you all a happy Diwali from the CGR family. I welcome you all to the day 5 of the Climate Change Conference of People in the context of COP26, Glasgow, that's being organized by the Earth Center, an Institute for Leadership, and Council for Green Revolution, an environmental organization based out of Hyderabad. The partner organizations for today's conference include Vande Mataram Foundation, Dharma Seva, Raitu Nestam, Aikyata Initiative, Grace, Chetana Society, Nirvahana, CSR Memorial Trust, Janma Foundation, and many others. In the context of climate change, it's a major global concern. Its magnitude dwarfs any other challenge on Earth, and the very important responsibility before the humanity is to mitigate climate change. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change 6th Assessment Report 2021 gave stern warnings on looming climate crisis. The revelation of the report is called Code Red for Humanity. The United Nations Conference of Parties, COP26 on climate change, is being organized in Glasgow, Scotland from 31st October till 12th November 2021. It is a crucial summit in the context of climate energy. The whole world is looking towards the proceedings and the outcome. Keeping the importance of the issue in view, Council for Green Revolution, an environmental organization, is organizing this conference of people on climate change on the same dates, that is from 31st October to 12th November 2021. Further, it is an occasion to create massive awareness, to bring people together to inspire climate action. The program is being organized in partnership with many other organizations, as mentioned earlier. A diverse group of people are converging at Earth Center to bring focus on the climate emergency. In fact, as I mentioned, today is the day 5, and there have been thematic events for 13 days that are being organized. And today's theme, as all of us know, is legal approach to climate change. To say in short, the Vedic wisdom manifests a philosophy of law and human governance based upon the idea of peaceful coexistence of community. Welfare of each element of our ecosystem is the welfare of each member of the community, and ultimately survival of each of us and of the earth is dependent upon it. Hence, we find the importance of understanding the legal approach to climate change in today's session. We have with us Harsh Bedi, who is a lawyer and the founder of Mandate Project from New Delhi. Then we have Mr. R. Sushant Reddy, who is a lawyer practicing at Hyderabad High Court and other courts. Then we have Mr. M. Pavan Kumar, an advocate from Andhra Pradesh. Then I am Sri Harshita, a law student and a social activist. I welcome you all once again to today's discussion. Without any further ado, I request Mr. M. Pavan Kumar, practicing advocate at Andhra Pradesh. A short introduction to begin with. All of us know Pavan very well, and I don't think so. Pavan is a graduate, a BTech graduate initially. Then he has completed a dual masters both in governance and public administration. Then finished his law from Delhi University. He's been active in the field of environmental issues from the past 10 to 12 years. One of the notable issue that he has taken up to fight is the Musi River case before the NGT. And he's been an active member and a volunteer with CGR also from many years. So Pavan, the floor is yours, and Pavan will be talking regarding the international climate change legal framework and the principles.
Thank you, Harshita. Happy Diwali to all the speakers who are here, and Happy Diwali, Harshita and Sai Bhaskar sir. Indeed, it's a pleasure for me to attend this particular session, which is being conducted on the lines of COP26, which is being held at Glasgow. When I was first approached for this particular, we wanted to have some very good speakers for the topic. Fortunately, I got this topic of speaking about international legal instruments as such. What exactly is happening at international level? What are the type of legislations that are present? When we speak about climate change laws specifically, the entire genesis for climate laws comes from international covenants, international treaties, and those aspects. In fact, the first conference, the first World Climate Conference, was held in Geneva in 1979. Now, today, when we see, this is 42 years. After 42 years, we have made a very good amount. We have spent a good amount of time, and today we are in the process of bringing out climate change specific legislations. Now, these are not legislations on any specific subject matter, but it's a legislation on entire climate itself. Now, this was not imagined some 40 years ago. If I'm not wrong, in 1979, when the world first conference, climate conference, was held, it was declared that there is a variability in climate. So, and today when we see, we know that there is a climate change, which is a reality. Many countries have passed legislations with respect to climate change, be it UK or Germany. So if we compare these 40 years of journey, we can say that international community, led by many governments, led by many international organizations like United Nations and other organizations, many philanthropists who have funded for these particular programs and made sure that these particular climate change related aspects are mitigated as soon as possible. And if I'm not wrong, in today's time, we have already seen what can be the devastating effect of climate change. We have very good predictive models which can speak about what the kind of changes that we'll see with 1 degree Celsius average increase in the planet's temperature, then 1.5 degrees, then 2 degrees, then 3 degrees. So we have predictable models with good accuracy. And we have also seen some devastating effects of climate change, like a rise in the sea level, and which is definitely going to affect islands which are at lower levels when compared to sea level. When we look at the climate change aspect, from 1979, then we had in 1988 the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, was formed, which brought out its first assessment report. Now, this is a very unique body which specifically deals with climate change. Now, they do all kind of scientific research. They predict, they take the help of technology. With scientific assessment, they bring out a report. And so far, they have brought out 6 reports. And in fact, when you look at the first report, based on the first report, there was a clear consensus among the members of that particular body that climate change is real. In fact, and the same was reiterated in subsequent conferences also of 97 and 2002 also. What we can see is the first assessment report. Based on this assessment report, the United Nations again came up with a new body, which is the present one, the United Nations Panel on Climate Change, which conducts the COP programs, the Conference of Parties across the finding out different places and conducting conferences and making sure that the parties, the countries, member countries, come to a particular agreement on reducing the emissions, be it greenhouse gases, or making sure that the temperature, the global temperature, does not cross 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees Celsius, which is more or less like a dangerous line. And if it is crossed, then it will have a exponential nature. if we look at the 1992 conference, also called as the Earth Summit, the Rio conference, this was the first time when United Nations Convention on Climate Change was proposed. And in the same conference, there was also a proposal for beginning United Nations Conference on Biodiversity. So this particular conference was very important. And subsequently, we had conferences in 97, the Earth Summit Plus. Then we had World Climate Conference in Kyoto. And this was the first time when the member countries, they started ratifying and started accepting their responsibility. For example, US pledged to reduce their emissions by 7%, and then EU said it would do by 8%. Japan said for 6%. So the member countries which ratified, they started working towards reducing targets. And in a way, this was one major, if you ask me, one major achievement to bring together member countries and making sure that they are accepting this. Now, if you then we had again 2002, we had a Delhi conference. Then we had in 2012, and most famous we had in 2015 Paris Agreement. So if you look at the journey from 1979 in the first climate conference, World Climate Conference, and if you look at today, the COP26, 42 years have passed, and there has been a lot of journey for with regard to climate change. Now, what are the specific climate change laws that have been brought in by different countries? Now, this one aspect is wherein not much has been done by member countries, barring few countries and some states. There are specific legislation for climate change. This is one lagging area, we can say. But if you see from 1997 to 2012, indeed, you can say that as per the reports of climatelaws.org, there has been 30 times increase in legislations related to climate and environment. Now, this is one positive aspect. Some of them are directly related to climate and reduction in the greenhouse gases. Some are with respect to air pollution, water pollution, wildlife protection, with regard to biodiversity. Now, overall, if you see from 1997 to 2020, for 164 countries, there is an increase from 60 to 1800 laws and policies clubbed together. Now, this is something which is encouraging, though we may not accept looking at the climate change that we are seeing. This may be very less, but then having said that, bringing the entire international community member states to one place and making sure that they follow these ratified declarations, and they are going back and making domestic laws based on these international instruments and laws. That itself is an achievement, and no doubt a lot has to be done in future also. Now, if we look at the case of important climate change legislations done at international level, we can see United Kingdom. Now, UK has brought in UK Climate Change Act in 2008. Now, this particular act, this is one of the earliest known climate change laws which has observed across the globe. This particular act, this brings out a legally binding mitigation goals. Now, there are n number of mitigation measures that has to be taken up as per this law, and they have set a target also. Now, they brought out a target of reducing the greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2050, keeping in mind the 1990 levels. Okay, now this is this was way back in 2008, 13 years ago. UK has done it, and as recently in 2019, they have again rechanged it to having a net zero emissions by 2050. Now, this is very ambitious, and I really hope it is done. Now, if you look at this UK Climate Change Act, now this particular act has both long-term and short-term targets to achieve these particular measures of emissions. Now, another important aspect in this particular act is that it has an independent advisory body which is called as the Committee on Climate Change. And the main purpose of this body is to advise the government and the parliament on carbon budgeting. Now, this is very unique, carbon budgeting, which has been observed for last more than a decade now, a couple of decades. Many countries are taking up carbon budgeting. They are trying to gather funds for these kind of setup. Some have a separate climate budget, some countries, and some countries are having trying to shift the annual budget, fiscal budget, into a more climate friendly budget. So all kind of measures and national policies are gathered, directed towards a climate budget. Now, there is another important aspect in the UK Climate Change Act is National Adaptation Program to manage unavoidable climate change effects. Now, earlier I was talking about mitigation plans. Now, this act also has adaptation programs. If there are any specific climate change disasters which are occurring in UK, so they have an adaptation program. So, yeah. So this is in general what UK has brought in 2008, and in 2019 again they amended, and they are now trying for net zero emissions by 2050. Now, another country which I would like to emphasize is on Mexico. Now, Mexico is an emerging country, and similar to India, it is also one of the growing developing economy. Now, Mexico brought a climate change legislation, which is called the General Law on Climate Change in 2012. After 4 years of UK brought this particular legislation. And this law, unlike in UK, this particular law, what this brought was an institutional structure for fighting climate change. Now, there was an institutional structure and a coordination and decision-making body, which will advise all the aspects of mitigation, adaptation for reaching out targets for Mexico. Now, in fact, this is the first large oil-producing nation to bring out such legislation on climate change. Now, they have brought in, through this particular law, they have brought in a national system on climate change, which will have Interministerial Commission on Climate Change, the first body. Then they will have another body named as Climate Change Council, and then National Institute for Ecology and Climate Change. Now, these bodies form the basic pillars for their fight towards climate change. And these particular bodies will have members from their federal Congress, that is their central body of government, and then members from state governments and also municipal authorities. Now, if you look at Mexico, the basic difference between Mexico and UK is that when the act was brought in by both these countries, the structural and the institutional mechanism for Mexico is very strong. And whereas for UK, it is more of an advisory kind of a body. But another difference that we can see in both of these is, for UK, the eminent targets are binding in nature for the entire country. But whereas for Mexico, they have made it conditional on the support of international community. Now, how are we going to achieve the targets in this particular scenario is a very big task. Achieving for UK is somewhat easy because it is binding for them, but for Mexico, it is a bit challenge. The Mexicans have set target of 30% emission by 2020. This was way back in 2012 when the act was enacted. But now they have, at the same time, they have also planned for 50% reduction by 2050 emissions. Now, Mexico said a very interesting point in their particular law, which was business as usual. They never specified any target as such, I mean, a level. For example, UK said from 1990 levels, but Mexico has said that 30% of the business, I mean, what was happening at that time, they will reduce by 30%. But for 2050, their target, they said we will reduce by 50%. That will be based on 2000 levels. but not 1990, which usually other countries take up. Now, this is the basic difference between the kind of structure, the law that was passed by UK, and then the same was passed by similar one passed by Mexico. Now, when we move on, we can see Germany. Germany had passed a federal climate change law recently in 2019, and this was completely based on the Germany's commitment to the Paris Agreement, 2015 Paris Agreement, and as such, they have aimed at limiting their entire support for this entire climate change will be to limit the global temperature, keeping it below 2 degrees centigrades and possibly between below 1.5 degrees centigrades. Now, when we compare all these aspects, and when we come to India, in India, we don't have any specific climate change legislation as such. One climate change bill was introduced in Lok Sabha in 2015, in fact, by MP Sri Kailash Narayan Singh. And the main crux of this particular bill, which was introduced in Lok Sabha, was to reduce the emissions of greenhouse gases and to set a target for that, and then to set up a national committee, to establish a national committee on climate change to take further actions based on the recommendations of that particular community, and further to introduce carbon budgeting and carbon trading scheme. Now, this was brought in 2015, and still nothing has moved forward in this particular aspect, and we are still waiting for any future legislations in this particular aspect, which has to be done up as soon as possible and in a speedy manner. Now, when we look at what now for any country to move forward before enacting any specific legislations with regard to climate change, now what is the experience that we gathered at international level and at different countries when they have enacted? Now we have climate change legislations for nearly 1.5 decades in the world. Now, what exactly have we learned, and what are the important features that we need to have so that we may proceed further while enacting any climate change related framework legislation? Now, one crucial thing that I can see is targets. Now, since 1990s, targets have played a very crucial role in mobilizing countries, member states to accept legislations. For example, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, member countries have committed there. For example, India, based on the powers under the EP Act, the central government had enacted for a reduction of this one greenhouse gas emissions. This was done in, I think it was done in the year 2000 or 2002. So whenever there is a target which has been provided to any member state, now countries take up very aggressively. Some countries, emerging economies or developing countries, they have their own domestic compulsions with regard to energy policy of energy. But having said that, the situation throughout the world has come to a stage wherein we cannot compromise or we cannot rely on the domestic compulsions. The global climate change phenomena is real, and it requires a specified targets at global level and also at member state level and also regional level within the country. Now, it can be both long-term goal, we can say 2030, 2050 or 2070. We can say intermediary or medium-term goals. Apart from that, the framework legislation on climate change should also have mitigative measures and adaptive measures. Now, mitigative measures is very essential because when we look at the climate change aspect, the main contribution is anthropogenic, human-induced activities, be it industrialization or post-industrialization world. Now, this has largely contributed to the whatever problem that we are facing as of now. So if we say then we need to mitigate, now taking mitigation measure is a very big thing because it directly affects many countries, the economy. For example, the classic case of reducing the greenhouse gases like chlorofluorocarbons and fluorocarbons. In 90s, it was decided to reduce the emission so as to protect ozone layer. Now, ozone layer is again one major. If there is a thinning of ozone layer in the atmosphere, there is direct impact of UV rays on Earth, which definitely increases the temperature. Now, there was the international community and the many national governments saw this and took mitigative measures to reduce the chlorofluorocarbons from the atmosphere. And to a large extent, we have succeeded in reducing the greenhouse gases, mainly the fluorocarbons. No doubt carbon dioxide is still there. So mitigation laws are very essential, and then adaptation related laws. If there are climate induced or climate change induced disasters, how are our cities going to, or how are our legislations or laws going to help countries and people at large to cope with these? These kind of adaptive measures are also indeed needed so that our we are ready whenever such problems or climate induced problems are coming to us. We are ready with adaptive measures. And then there shall be periodic assessment of climate risks and vulnerabilities. And there shall be an institutional mechanism for all kinds of scientific researching and bringing out data, real-time data, and then independent advices and coordinations. Then another crucial aspect is we need to create fund whenever we want to fight climate change. Whenever a country doesn't have a dedicated fund for these particular kind of aspects, then we need to create a fund, and the same has to be institutionalized. We can have a climate change fund, it's a classic name, so it can be used, or we can have anything. And but the best, for me personally, I think the best way forward is to have a dedicated climate change fund in the annual budget itself. Now, this will institutionalize the fight against climate change for a long time. For example, we have a separate ministry for every aspect, and everyone has their own kind of fund. So similarly, a dedicated fund can be provided in the regular budget, in the annual budget, fiscal budgets. Now, another important aspect will be engaging all the crucial stakeholders, whether it be government, whether it be civil society, corporations, corporate houses, or any concerned citizens. So we need to engage people, we need to engage philanthropists, we need to engage all the relevant stakeholders so that this particular framework legislations can be taken forward, and at the same time, the result that we are trying to achieve, the targets that we are trying to achieve to bringing down the global average temperature below 1.5 or 2, this is achieved. So this coordination and among stakeholders, and this is a must. So these are some of the basic features that we can say that are very much essential in a climate change related legislations. Now, if we can see, there are some international organizations that have come up with very beautiful declarations with regard to certain legal principles. Now, there is one such declaration of 2014, which is International Law Association Declaration of Legal Principles Related to Climate Change. Now, this particular declaration has got 10 articles. I'll not go into details of all the ones, but only few of them. For example, in this particular declaration, in draft Article 3, it talks about the characterizes the climate system as a common natural resource. Now, this is very unique. Usually what we see is we talk about sustainable development, which usually talks about inter and intra-generational equity, sustainable development. Now here, we are talking about climate system as a common natural resource for the benefit of present and future generations. Now, this is one unique aspect that I saw in this particular declaration. Similarly, we also have Oslo Principles on Climate Change Obligations, which was given in 2015. Now, I would like to conclude by saying only one thing. There is a major challenge in adapting, or let us say bringing out these particular international framework. What are the major salient features into a domestic law? Now, countries, some countries, developed countries, are able to do in a much better and a quick manner, and some developing countries are still facing challenges owing to a domestic political consumptions, owing their economic status and these aspects, other aspects. Now, this has to be seen in a very urgent manner. If we want to bring out climate-specific legislations at international level in all the countries, I don't want to say that not even a single country is left behind. All the countries should be there, and they should have these kind of specific legislation. So there should be a renewed particular effort in this direction, and there should be a global consensus also on supporting these countries by providing them, let us say, clean technology or other aspects, again, which is a controversial aspect, which I don't want to get deeper into. So the countries have to be supported for bringing these kind of legislations based on their economic reality, based on their domestic compulsions, but at the same time looking at the climate change. Now, because the climate change is here, it is real, and we need to act. I once again thank Council for Green Revolution and the organizers for giving me this opportunity to present myself in this particular topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Pawan. Thank you for stressing on the fact that climate change is real, and then starting to say about what are the international principles that are existing, and then explaining about what is the difference between a country which has a mandate to mitigate climate change and which doesn't have a mandate to mitigate, and then why are we facing difficulties to integrate international principles into domestic laws. You have raised some important concerns today, and we hope to take it ahead to the next level. Then now I request Mr. Harsh Bedi, a lawyer and the founder of Mandate Project, an online platform to facilitate better coordination between experts, civil society, and policy practitioners. He has a background in policy and international relations, and his focus areas include governance structures, policy networks, regulatory frameworks, and problem solving through tech-based innovation. He is involved in developing tools that facilitate informed democratic engagement in order to find collaborative solutions to complex issues. Harsh studied law at Campus Law Center, Faculty of Delhi, University of Delhi. Prior to that, he obtained his master's in international relations and political science from the Graduate Institute, Geneva, and his bachelor degree from St. Stephen's College, Delhi. Today, Harsh will be talking about legal principles that govern environmental law and their effectiveness in mitigating climate change. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Shri Arshata. Thanks very much for that. And good afternoon, everyone. Happy Diwali. And I want to thank the organizers, Council for Green Revolution, for organizing this event, and also for giving me the opportunity to speak here. Am I audible? Can you just let me know if it's coming across all right? Yeah?
Yeah, clear.
Okay, perfect. So I think, firstly, it's a wonderful initiative that you have undertaken, and you're having these discussions around climate change. And I think so how I want to proceed for my presentation and for my discussion is just to do a little bit of a context setting of the discourse around climate change itself, discuss some of the principles, and also look at how climate change is being tackled within the legal framework in our country, in India. So I think Pawan's presentation has been extremely helpful in setting the international context. And of course, most of climate change related discourse, the treaties, arrangements, commitments that have been made by different countries we've been watching these evolve over the years. And I think one of the key changes that we witness is over the course of the 42-year period that Pawan mentioned, that we've seen how climate change was always framed in a manner where the crisis was something that was impending, but something that would come at a much later stage in time, right? It was always very distant. You would see the climate crisis would hit us in 2030, 2040, 2050. But now the discourse has evolved to recognize the immediacy, the urgency of it, and also the reality of climate change. So I think that has been one of the key changes that allows for coordinated action, for political will to be constructed around the need for such legislation. So international agreements, like Pawan said, they're great, and a lot of these documents have very lofty principles. But the problem with them largely lies in the fact that there are no enforcement mechanisms. The only way that you can translate these into anything effective is when you have legislation enacted domestically in municipal law, so the laws of our country. And so just to get started, let me discuss a little bit about what the framework is in India itself. Now, all environmental laws, the foundation of them lies in the Constitution of India. In the directive principles of state policy, the state is enjoined to protect the environment, and similarly, a duty is cast on citizens also to protect the environment, forests, animals, and so on. In addition to this, we have a series of laws that have been enacted to protect the environment. Some of these flow from international treaties and obligations made. And Article 253 of the Constitution of India allows the translation of these international commitments into municipal law. So we have the Environment Protection Act. We have various acts for instance, we have for water prevention and control of pollution. We have the Air Act. We have acts for biodiversity, for forests, and so on. And we have acts for dispute resolution. So we have the National Green Tribunal, which is set up by an act. And while this framework exists for environment protection and for controlling pollution, they don't directly tackle climate change itself. So these are relevant to climate change insofar as, for instance, if we sort of take climate change for what it specifically is, which is change in the climate on account of basically carbon emissions, greenhouse gases, and so on. These acts may contain provisions to check that kind of pollution or those kind of emissions. But climate change is something that needs to be seen with a much broader perspective and with a much longer time scale. So it's not something that has to be controlled immediately, right? So emissions going into, let's say, water bodies controlled by the Water Act. There are penalties for industrial units and all that release untreated waste or effluents into the water. And that is something, the effect of it can be seen with immediacy. The controls can also be operated, but climate change is something, the greatest hurdle or the greatest challenge to dealing with, which has been potential deniability or placing the risk in a far future scenario where it doesn't immediately affect you. And because of that, because the discourse did that, there was a distancing, which led to a creation of doubt of whether the effects were real or not, and the possibility of deniability of its effects. So now that there is clear recognition, now that frameworks are in place and being developed constantly, we see those in the form of pledges, we see the NDCs, we see commitments, and a lot of these commitments to international obligations are based on technologies that don't currently exist. So climate change obligations still operate in a tricky space where it is difficult to ensure that the obligations are properly being met. And in case they are not, the enforcement mechanisms, those are still very difficult to settle upon and also see if they function. So we have the environment, we have the legislative framework, we have these laws dealing with the environment. We don't have any law dealing directly with climate change. Aman mentioned that there was a bill that was introduced in 2015 for climate change, but that has not been enacted. And so perhaps one of the things that needs to be relooked at is whether if a specific legislation for climate change is due, and if so, what it could look like. Now, moving to the principles, which was the other broad thing that I wanted to discuss. The principles around environment law and environment protection, these flow from international treaties, as well as, and these have also been recognized by the Indian judiciary in a series of cases. And some of them are well known, and everyone would have heard of things like polluter pays principle, or you've heard of doctrines such as the public trust doctrine, and you have the precautionary principle. So with climate change, where you are looking at long-term effects and controlling long-term or containing potential future climate crises, it is important to err on the side of caution. So the precautionary principle is one which says that basically if you can choose between options of what would do the least amount of damage to the environment, you should do whatever is necessary to ensure that you mitigate and minimize the potential impact on the environment. And this would be one of the important things when dealing with climate change as well. While we are now seeing tangible effects of long-term rise in temperatures because of emissions, it's no longer left up to conjecture. So, sorry, just a second. My screen has frozen. I'm sorry, am I still connected?
Yes, you are. Yeah.
All right, perfect. I lost my train of thought. So yes, the principles that have been distilled into, which have basically been implemented through the judiciary, through an activist judiciary that we've seen through the 1980s onwards. A lot of the interventions to protect the environment have come through the judiciary, but this is not all. In order to give effect to a lot of these principles, there are other instruments that are also available. Just last year, there was a large discussion around one such instrument, which is the Environment Impact Assessment Notification. Now, the 2020 notification had been significantly watered down in comparison to the 2006 notification. But it is tools like this which allow us to actually evaluate what the tangible, measurable impact of any given project, development projects, construction projects, or anything else would be, and then to take corrective and mitigative measures, giving effect to a principle, say, such as the precautionary principle. And these are the kind of tools that will help us effectively tackle climate change. So while international obligations and all are good to guide us in the right direction, to create the necessary discourse, to create political will and concerted action, it is still going to be tools such as this. It is going to be interventions by public spirited individuals, by organizations, by instruments, by the use and by the strengthening of instruments such as EIA, which will help actually and effectively contain climate change. So I will limit my points to this. I would like to make more, but would we be having a bit of a discussion on these points after? Because I'd like to interact with some of the participants and
Actually, majority of our participants have joined live through YouTube, so I
okay.
think that will be a little difficult. If you want to add something, then you have like 10 minutes.
Okay. I don't think I'm going to use those 10 minutes. I think I would concede the floor to the next speaker. But I would just like to conclude with broad strokes of what I believe should be or could be the way forward. Climate change, again, this is not something that is that is limited or restricted to anyone. It affects the world at large. It will affect different communities, different countries disproportionately. Weaker communities, countries that are in low-lying areas that are susceptible to a rise in sea levels will be disproportionately affected. But that doesn't mean that we should distance ourselves from those communities and from the challenge and from the risks that these issues will pose. We already have climate refugees. We have situations of drought in places such as in South Africa, and we see large-scale climatic variations that are occurring, disturbances that are occurring, weather patterns, climatic patterns, and everything which are changing. That would be difficult for anyone to deny or overlook. And I think all of these need to serve as a wake-up call for everyone, not just for our leaders, because political will is also largely shaped by an informed citizenry, by an informed civil society. And I think a large part of the duty also falls on civil society to ensure that there is a sort of well-informed and a continuous engagement and pressure on those who decide the policies and decide the laws that will help us contain climate change, to ensure that obligations are met, and also so that responsibility is not fragmented and distributed amongst different individuals, because this duty and this responsibility belongs to everyone. And I think as long as we remain cognizant of this, we will be able to meet a lot of the all the targets that have been set, the obligations that have been put in place. But we cannot leave it simply to countries or to the setting up of laws or creating of legislations. There needs to be constant oversight. There needs to be pressure. There needs to be engagement. There needs to be a sense of common and differentiated responsibility, as they kept saying, for the obligations even under Kyoto. So I think with that, I will conclude and concede the floor. And I just want to thank Council for Green Revolution for the opportunity to speak here today.
Thank you, Harsh. In fact, it's very true that laws in the documents without action will not have any point or will not serve a purpose until the civil society takes up the equal responsibility. And your points and the references you've made today reminds me of the word Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which says world is one family. So it's very important that we consider wake-up calls from different parts of the world and act as immediate as possible. Thank you. Now moving on to the next speaker for the day. We have Mr. R. Sushant Reddy with us. He's a dynamic and focused legal professional with more than 7 years of active practice before various courts and tribunals in Hyderabad. His core practice includes a banking laws, insolvency and bankruptcy code, and other corporate advisory work. Apart from that, he has provided advice to clients engaged in infrastructure development, real estate, technology, and sustainable energy, amongst others. He has filed more than 500 cases on behalf of several clients and has consistently delivered results exceeding the client's expectations. Today, Sushant will be talking to us about what is the role of judiciary in affecting the climate change, and what has been the stand of judiciary till date to the effect of climate change. The floor is yours, Sushant.
Thank you, Sri Arshita. Although she has introduced me as a lawyer for several corporates, my interest in speaking today stems from my deep interest for wildlife and some disturbing recent reports that I have read regarding how there's no conservation or there's no protection to core tiger areas in Adilabad district in Telangana. And it is my endeavor today to equip all of you and make you understand that the legal recourses available and the legal principles that have been laid down through judicial activism. Today, as we speak, there is smoke emanating from my balcony as we are speaking on Diwali. And if it is us who is just unfavorably altering the surrounding around us. So the recourse that is available to all of you, as you all know, might be to approach any problem that you have. You can file a public interest litigation in the Supreme Court under Article 32 or the High Court under Article 226. But the less used and the less known, as I would say, recourse in some situations of public nuisance is Section 133 of CRPC. Now, as Harsh has rightly set the tone by broadly talking about the three principles. There are more legal principles, but I'll just state the judicial pronouncements under which these judicial principles have emanated, and what the courts have said. Harsh was talking about public trust doctrine, and this emanates from the case of Kamalnath versus Union of India, where an influential politician was granted permission to construct, and he encroached upon 27 bighas of land on the banks of River Bias. And when the construction was to commence, corrective actions were taken, and it was stopped on the lines that the construction would obstruct and change the course of the river, that is River Bias. Now, what was held in that case was the public trust doctrine. Basically, what public trust doctrine says is all the public places and public monuments, everything belong to the public, and the government is shouldered with the responsibility to protect them. This is a very broad principle that can be used when any one of you is thinking about taking any legal recourse when there is some sort of interference, say a mining activity, or there is any river stream that is being obstructed to. Now, Harsh was talking about the polluter pays principle also. This was first held, or this legal principle was recognized in the Vellore Citizen Forum's case. In this, the tanneries that were the effluents from the tanneries were being released into the surrounding water streams or fields, and they eventually were merged into the local river. This pollutants roughly polluted around 35,000 hectares is what I've seen, I know, from the judgment. And because of this, the principle of sustainable development evolved. Basically, while upholding the principle that any polluter should pay for the damage caused, the principle that sustainable development, that there should be a balance between the economic development and the ecology, was recognized. And this is famously cited in many judgment pronouncements, or any environmental case that you come across. This will be cited. The third and most interesting, or I would say a case which should ignite young minds to approach the courts to take the legal recourse, is that of the CNG case in Delhi, where all the 12,000 buses in Delhi were forced, rather, I would say, to use clean energy, CNG, basically. Now, this was possible because of involvement of not just because of judicial activism, but because of the involvement of many stakeholders of many industries. I was reading a recent article by His Lordship's Justice U. Lalit, and His Lordship's talks about how at every stage there was a challenge, and continuous mandamus was the key. Now, to the activists out there, continuous mandamus is, in common parlance, we can say it is continuous monitoring by the court. Now, in a continuous mandamus, I believe continuous mandamus has a long-lasting effect, and in majority of the environmental issues, the courts have not instantly disposed of matters. They've kept them pending. They've monitored the progress at every stage, and this made the reform. This set the tone for the impossible to happen. I particularly talk about this case because when CNG was being implemented, there was a lackluster attitude from the government. Then there were many difficulties faced, and it was the court, through its monitoring power, had implemented many stakeholders, implemented the corporation which was responsible for CNG, implemented industrialists, which were industries which were getting most of the CNG, and diverted that CNG to meet the requirements of the local buses, and saw to it at every stage that all the problems in implementing the orders of the court were removed, the obstructions were removed, and finally CNG was being used, the cleaner, in all the buses across Delhi. This was only possible because of this continuous monitoring before the court. And if not for such continuous monitoring, if not for such judicial activism, I would not have thought that this was possible, or maybe the government would have taken at least 10 to 15 or 20, or we don't know how many years the government would have taken to implement CNG. Now, I cite these, or I talk about these principles and how these cases have monitored the change that was necessary. But at the same time, this is only to let you know that you have to believe in the system. You have to take the legal recourse. You have to know what the courts have said, and at the same time, there should be some checks and balances. In my little experience, I should say, I've seen many frivolous litigations also. Often, a public interest litigation, if it is filed regarding a mining activity, it is done so at the behest of a rival mining company. As activists, it is also, I believe it is also your bounden duty to see to it that such frivolous cases are kept away from the courts, and the courts spend their valuable time in deciding the actual issues. Now, my interest in speaking today is also from to connect to the activists locally, or who wish to approach the courts for a genuine cause. And from my perspective, I believe climate change should start at home. We are talking about big construction companies, mining companies changing the course of nature, altering the surroundings unfavorably. But we should introspect ourselves, and so I'll just tell you a couple of thoughts in my mind before on how we should introspect and see to it that we change our day-to-day activity to reduce any sort of pollution, carbon footprint, as you call it. So I think there's a lot of learning from COVID, and I would now deviate a bit from the legal approach and see how the court should implement framework. Say, suppose you have a company of a size more than a company having more than 500 employees. In future, I believe the legal framework should be such that they limit the number of people attending physical work, taking a cue from the functioning of the courts. A majority of young lawyers in the High Court or the subordinate courts whom I interact with on a day-to-day basis are of the opinion that courts should be functioning virtually. Even if the High Court functions virtually for one day, we would be reducing a footfall of 800 to 1,000 people in the court. I see maybe 400, 500 cars in the parking lot. See, equal number of bikes in the parking lot. Now, legal framework should be put in place so that we see that all this is curtailed. It's definitely a learning from COVID. It's not that we wait for someone to act against a big mining company or a construction company which is polluting the surrounding river, there's cutting down trees or the felling of trees. I think if we start from our perspective, from home or from our workplace, there's a lot to change rather than just the national issues. So I urge all of you to see to it that you change your thought process and see on what changes can be implemented in your day-to-day life and what legal framework is necessary to bolster all these companies, corporates, to reduce footfall, reduce traffic, reduce pollution. Even you must have all seen how clean or how unpolluted the roads were. What was the quality of the air during the pandemic? So it was definitely a learning. And as I conclude my short talk, I urge all of you once again just to introspect, see what legal framework should be put in place so that all these companies reduce the travel of employees or whatever clean energy they can use, they should be using. And one more thing that interests me is the lack of legal framework for automated solar powered or clean energy powered vehicles in different states. Although Telangana has implemented that there would be no road tax for a completely electrical vehicle or a clean energy vehicle. It's time that they have a legal framework. They encourage that people use solar powered vehicles and everything, and there needs to be a proper framework, legal framework for that also as well. So I thank Council for Green Revolution for this wonderful panel discussion, and Pawan with his informative talk has enlightened about the international framework and what needs to be done, and how the central government, even though it introduced in 2015, did not take it forward. And I believe Pawan, with his active state of mind, should go ahead and approach the competent courts seeking directions to implement the necessary framework. And it was also informative on as Harsh set a tone for my talk as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Sushant. Thank you for pointing out the fact that it's very important we start introspecting before we talk about larger issues. That was one of the important takeaways that we have from your talk today. And thank you for enlightening us with some of the important judgments that play a key role even today in pointing out the importance of the principles and what are the legal aspects that we have to concentrate on. Uh, uh, we move towards the end of today's session, and we have some important pointers that we have collected from all of your uh, talks or short speech that you have given. And we would like to point out that CGR is compiling all the suggestions that we get from everyday thematic discussions, and we shall be sharing it with the UN through a representation. And I hope our talks will definitely go a long way today. And Pawan began highlighting about what is the international framework in place, what are the regulations that are there, and why is it important for us to understand that a larger international aspect cannot be integrated into a domestic law. Then moving ahead, we had Harsh, who spoke on what are the different principles in place and what is the Indian law talking about the climate change. And then Sushant highlighted about the important judicial pronouncements, and he ended on a note that it's very important to introspect, and it is important that we take responsibility in on from smaller stage, and then we understand how that can impact on a larger aspect. Uh, all of you all in fact pointed out some of the important aspects, and there prevails hope and pessimism in fact regarding the outcome of the conference that is happening in Glasgow as well. There are feelings that there has been no progress since the past 20 plus COP summits, and what is the point? There will be people, there will be discussions, but what is the action has always been the response of the public. But let's wish that this COP should not become another formal event which is just going to stand in papers. Let's hope that it will create some confidence and inspiration to every citizen in the world. We hope strong commitments and consensus emerge at Glasgow in the wake of stern warnings, at least from the latest IPCC report that we have got. Environmental protection and climate action, as pointed out, is a great civic responsibility. Every one of us, whether in farm, factory, home, office, even while traveling or wherever we are, should be very responsible. We must respect the Panchabhutas, the air, water, land, space, and energy to sustain our future on Earth. Earth will continue to be livable planet if all the global citizenry take collective responsibility. If we have compassion to the future generations, we have to act now. Our every action matters. In fact, today's discussion as well. We have to reorient our developmental, lifestyle, spiritual, attitudinal, and changes for a sustainable and climate secure world. Uh, let's conclude with one line. We say, we are in the crucial moment in our times of climate energy, and it's now or never. Let's sign for a sustainable future. I thank each one of you all for joining today's discussion and making the efforts of CGR and other partner organizations more valuable and meaningful by providing your inputs to this subject. Thank you everyone. I know it's Diwali and you all have spent your time today for something that is more meaningful. Let's hope this action today on this festival brings a more impactful change. Thank you everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Sri Harshita. You are conducted very well, and almost all the sessions went on very well and most valuable, whatever discussions happened. Happy Diwali to all. Thank you. Bye.
Sri Arshita, before we end, if you can collate all the stakeholders' contacts or anything. One of the reason we're talking today is that there's a lack of connect between individuals who want to work, or if I want to do the pro bono part of my work in or someone wants to reach me. I think Council for Green Revolution has to do such an it should undertake that exercise in connecting everyone. And suppose someone wants to file a public interest litigation, they might not get the right legal advice. I mean, they're always welcome to approach the Legal Service Authority, but from an interest point of view, if lawyers are interested in working in a particular field, it is better that you collate and bring all of these stakeholders on a common stand. Or tomorrow I want to write a paper. See, I've told you about the basic functioning of the courts, right? So I want to. It is my interest that I have to write a paper with relevant empirical data regarding what is the reduction in carbon footprint. Or suppose we have 2 days of virtual courts in a week, as you know, or not just because of the pandemic, and we continue that. There'll be a lot of reduction. Say, a lot of people will save money, fuel, the pollution, their time, energy, and there's so much more, not just the environmental aspect of it also. So it is my endeavor to write such a paper, and I do not know the correct people who would give me a rough assessment at least to help in my paper on what is the reduction in carbon footprint, or what is the energy or natural fuels that are being saved on account of just a day of virtual court in a week, which is possible, I feel, because now that COVID has done something that could not have been overturned for decades. Nobody thought that the judges or the advocates were not well versed, I would say, with online courts, were forced, and they have equipped themselves with the necessary knowledge, hardware, everything. So it is best that you take this platform to put everything together, collate data, and I urge all the stakeholders to collate that data or information on who wants to fight for what, so that it'll be easier for people to connect. And it is, rather than just talking, if I talk about execution, this would something I urge you to do if it is possible in your time. Okay.
Yeah, in fact, there is a team of 52 people from various sectors who have joined together. That includes people involved in the discussions on these 13 days into a WhatsApp group. So we will be more.
I'll tell you what will happen in a WhatsApp. So if you can put it in an Excel or something on what they do or what their areas of interest are, it's better rather than WhatsApp, because we don't know who is what.
True.
It is one thing
data is there. Will be.
Let me add, Sri Arshita. I think now whatever he said, it is the actionable point, and like preachers should practice. When judges make judgments, then what is their carbon footprint? I think this is an interesting and important project. We need to monitor the number of vehicles, the distances traveled, average. I think we could create a small app and use along all the lawyer or this court. People.
I mean, it's just not me, sir, but everyone can implement at their workplace.
Also, but practically what you suggested is what each individual can do to reduce the carbon footprint.
Yes.
That is perfect, and we'll work on that. And as Sri Arshita said, even going for this NGT or BAL or something if needed. So I think we have that kind of expertise together, as you all are also part of that. We'll go ahead with that. So we'll continue this discussion beyond this event today. I think this is again 1 year what we will do, and by next year, next COP, what we are going to present as what we have done. So I think these things are important. Thank you once and again to all of you. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.